Hi everyone, welcome to today's episode of Keyboard Warrior, How to Ace Email Communication for Better Productivity. Looking forward to this topic today. Just a quick overview of who we are if you're not familiar with our company. We are the third branch in a suite of organizations owned by one woman, Marianne Harris. She started in the industry 25 years ago with Positively Balanced, which provides third-party escrow account reconciliation services. In 2020, she launched Positively Closed, which provides remote closing support solutions. And we are Real Estate Closing Path. We provide training in all aspects of the closing process. Here with us today, we have our RECP team, and Sandi Donaldson is our lead educator. She is our expert point of view. She's had a lot of years in the industry and worked on all different sides of the settlement process. She's been in large firms, small firms, and really brings a lot of wit and wisdom to her teaching here at RECP. My name is Janis. I'm the executive director here at RECP. I offer you the outsider point of view. I always say full disclosure, I've never been a closer. My background was in education, and I was brought on to bring some structure around the curriculum development here at RECP. I help with onboarding students, and then we've been working on course accreditation since we launched, and we've been successful. So far, all of our courses are fully accredited in both Georgia and Florida, and we're looking to expand to other states. And then also in the room today, we have Pierre Blomglaven. She is an assistant trainer helping Sandi in our workshops, and also head of marketing. She's had the perfect perspective, having had some experience in industry, and she has really been the best voice to help us to promote it. And she actually was in our very first training class back in 2021 and has worked in various firms and various positions that have really given her some insight and unique perspective as the next generation. So here, we're glad to have you as well. Just a little bit about our topic today, Keyboard Warrior, how to ace communication for better productivity. Certainly clear professional communication can make or break a smooth closing process. There's a lot of ping pong back and forth with a lot of different people, and a good bit of that happens via email. So it is to your advantage to learn a few best practices, hopefully along the way, that will help you succeed. So certainly, we trust that you have experience and lots of your own wisdom that you've figured out along the way. And we just hope that today's conversation may give you something new to think about or something new that you can implement. And again, just maybe piggybacking on why is this topic important? You know, if you think about it, email is often your first impression with someone that you're working with professionally. Sometimes it's your only impression. In fact, maybe you've been emailing back and forth with someone for several years that you've never met this person in person. And so your only sense of their character, their personality, their sense of integrity, or their professionalism is only seen via email. And so you really want to be memorable in a good way, and you certainly want to be professional. And so this conversation is really built around hopefully a few tips and tricks that can help you in that manner. Let me check in with my coworkers real quickly. Anything you want to say before we dive in deeper?
No, you're exactly right. I mean, there's so many people that you engage with that you never meet. So, you know, when people say I'm not good at email, you have to get good at email because in some ways that's the only communication you're ever going to have with some people.
So true. And I think it's important to distinguish between professional email versus personal, right? If you're back and forth and on email all day, every day, and sometimes you're just, you know, checking in with family or friends, that's a whole different tone and insight into communication than you want to have at the office, so to speak. So that's also something to keep in mind. If you've ever heard the term code switch, which I know is used in different ethnic circles, to say, hey, you have a lingo and a way that you talk among your friends, people who know you well or share an ethnic background or even regional. I think it's Southern lingo is different than maybe the way people talk up north, but in a sense, you're code switching between your casual, informal self among friends versus who you are in a professional setting. And yeah, it's so important that comes across in email. All right, so first tip for this session today, and I don't know if you've thought about this, but be mindful of how you use marginal space. Use breaks between sentences. Typically, the eye tracks down the page and not always, well, also left to right. But think about today, a lot of people are also checking email on their phones. And so more is chunked in a smaller window. And when you have everything in a paragraph format, and I'm going to look ahead for those of you who might be watching us on our YouTube channel, I've got an example of this. When you're writing in long paragraphs, a big chunk of content can actually be overwhelming. It can be difficult to process. And I'll click back now to the previous slide. But when you separate things, actually separate sentences, it can be a little easier to track, a little easier to follow. It can assist people who might have certain learning challenges, reading or learning disabilities. They may still be excellent at their job, but just the way you are spacing things and being mindful of spacing in your emails can make a big difference.
Now, I would say that, email is not appropriate for every communication. And if it's got to be 3 pages, then maybe it should be a conversation, not an email. I know even in social media, even in fun things, if somebody posts something and I have to click more to get the whole thing, then forget it because I'm never going to read it.
Yeah.
So if you have a big block like what you were talking about, people may just skip over it and miss important things. And so if you don't want them to miss anything and it's going to be a lot, then maybe that should not be an email. Maybe that should be a phone conversation.
Yeah. I really appreciate that insight. I would agree with you 1,000%. Also, I'm a big fan of sending separate emails for separate topics. Like even if you've got 3 or 4 things to say, sometimes putting all of those 3 or 4 things in the same email makes it longer and then it's trickier to respond to. And I would actually send separate individual emails for the separate topic. And I think that makes it easier to process. What do you want to say, Pierre?
So email is a conversation. It's not exposition. It's not only about what you want to say and convey. It's about what that person is going to respond back with, or else there would be no point of sending it. So we have to think about the person receiving it. If we write it out in the way we're just getting all the information out, we're writing a big paragraph, great, we got all of our points. The person receiving it isn't getting everything that you said because it's not conducive to the way that we read, the way that we intake information. So we need to think with the end in mind. When the person is receiving it, how are they going to be able to look through this and glean the most important information? What can I cut that's not actually essential here? And how will that person react to it? How will I get what I need out of this, which is their response to my email?
That's so good. Back in the day when I was an English teacher, I would say, cut the fluff, trim the fat, cut the calories, so to speak. I used to teach that a paragraph was like a mental bite of food for your brain. And so you want the most nutritional information and the fewest amount of calories, and so cut the calories, trim the fat. So that also pertains to everyday email as well. So this is a perfect segue into the next tip or best practice. How can you help someone focus on just really what is the most important information? So think about anytime you are giving a date, a time, hey, can we set a meeting at this date and time, or we're going to plan an event on this date and time, are you available? Anytime that you can highlight that, make it bold font, underline it, give it extra margin, maybe set it apart with 2 or 3 spaces before the next comment. That really helps someone to zero in and focus on that detail. So again, if you're watching us and can see this next slide, I show an example here when it's all just in the same font versus when you're really differentiating to help something stand out. If you just say, are you available October 27th? What's the first thing everybody's going to do? Well, what day is that? So they're already going to go to a calendar and say, is that a Wednesday? Is that a Friday? Is that a Saturday? So if you tell them up front, you're saving them a step, and then they can easily say, oh no, I'm always out of the office on Thursday. I'm never available on a Thursday. And then they know, and again, the whole point is to be quicker, better, more efficient. And then your email is actually helping to support the person on the receiving end instead of them having to go and dig and research and try to decipher, exactly the day and time that we may be talking about. And I feel like I should add here, if the services you provide are nationally or internationally, it's important to include your time zone too, and to be mindful of meetings and dates and times you're setting that could affect someone in another part of the country. So keep that in mind. Any other comments here?
I think it's important to be judicious with your questions in an email. Like, narrow it down to 1 or 2 questions that you have. It can be overwhelming to receive an email that asks you 5 or 6 questions, and it's distracting, and you might not get all of the answers that you're looking for. You overload somebody asking for everything at once.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's so true. I find myself when I'm in the middle of writing an email, I'm usually still thinking it through myself. And it's worth another final read through before I send to see if I can cut that out. Sometimes by the end of the email, I've made some decisions that I can then go back and just cut and simplify, shorten and simplify for the receiver. Hey, you don't need to follow me through this whole decision process. Let's just, meet at the end point and see if we can find an agreement. Or, again, whatever the conversation will be. But so true. Keep it simple. All right, moving on. Best practices. Another good tip for email is to certainly be mindful of your tone. We know it's there. You can usually tell when someone's in a good mood, and you can usually tell when someone's not. And again, be aware. Certainly remove any negative emotions or triggers. You may feel them. You may have them. That doesn't mean you need to respond with them. So again, really be careful, especially in a professional setting where you're networking with someone that's going to be potentially a long-term relationship, right? You might be frustrated in the moment, but anything you can do to minimize that. Certainly just waiting to respond. The classic is count to 10 before you engage in any kind of argument. And, you need to walk away. Well, certainly the same is true with email. If you're triggered when you've got that email in the morning, maybe wait till the afternoon or the next day to respond, if possible. Again, some emails require more timely interaction. And then my piggyback to this is to get some feedback, like, ask a friend, ask a coworker, hey, am I reading this the wrong way? Or, hey, here's what I want to respond. Does this sound like I'm being rude, or is this still professional? And try to, do what you can to de-escalate any potential negative or difficult circumstances instead of just adding more fuel to the fire. Right? You don't want to do that. Thoughts here, Sandy?
Well, I was just going to say, going back to what Pierre said before, what is your end game? If what I want from this person is cooperation, or I need information from them, then responding in frustration or anger is not going to get me either one of those things. Over the years, I've composed 1,000 awful emails, and I save them in my drafts, and then I go back later in the day and look at it and go, what was I thinking? So just don't hit send, save it, and then you can go back, and there's I can remember there used to be words my mother did not allow us to say, and she would say to us, oftentimes, there must, in the English language, be another word you can use. And so you go back and look at that email you composed in anger and go, okay, how can I convey, the meaning of this without sounding confrontational or adversarial?
Yeah,
And if it's a situation that's going to escalate, again, that requires
yeah,
face-to-face interaction or a phone call.
yeah,
We don't need to start a war, a word war, right?
right.
In emails.
Yeah, I love that you said that. It keeps coming back around of knowing when to use email, knowing when to use a phone, and if there's any chance it could go south or it has already gone south, it can
Right.
help to get on the phone and have that friendly voice and try to redeem the moment. Or, maybe someone else is just having a really bad day, and if you can meet them with grace and kindness instead of it triggering now your bad day, and that takes a lot of skill. That happens a lot in the closing office, and I think it requires, a lot of customer service skill and professionalism. Um, I was going to say too that one way to kind of measure or test yourself, anytime you feel defensive in an email and you feel like you're having to over explain yourself, if you're already on that defensive mode, that's usually a sign that there's some emotionalism or trigger that's happening, and to back away. And again, revisit it when you can reset. Um, I like to pour out the wisdom. Sometimes the best defense is having a strong offense. And so anytime you can kind of get ahead of the game to help mitigate a potential difficult circumstance, the better. Our next tip here is to develop some emotional awareness. So this one ties into the previous slide quite a bit. Respond in a way to minimize a negative spiral and consider what they need to hear versus what you need to say. Again, be careful of just venting or oversharing, even if you are the one who's had a really bad day. Maybe save that for a best friend, a coworker who knows you well versus the stranger on the other end of the screen who may not know how to interpret, what you might be ranting about. So I love this little graphic that kind of shows, different keywords that are considered positive or negative, and kind of just right there hanging on the line. Anytime you feel irritated, frustrated, impatient, worried, doubtful, and then it leads into the stronger emotions of anger, rage, et cetera, et cetera. But if you can catch it when it's minimal, it's easier to pivot, right? It's easier to go from impatience and irritation to maybe hopeful, contentment, relief, etc. It's a little easier to switch when you're maybe in the middle of this spiral versus once you find yourself at the very bottom, then it's much harder to do. So just be aware of your own emotional needs and responses, and then try to be aware of where someone else is coming from, and again, responding with professionalism, grace, and kindness.
Yeah, I would say that the key word of all the words on this page is respond rather than
Yeah.
react. Because we walk away from it, or I do all the time, thinking what I should have said was, and sometimes what I should have said is more harsh than what I actually did say. What I
Yeah.
think, what you feel like you should have said, but maybe it isn't what you should have said. Maybe you
Yeah.
said what you should have said. So we have to remember that, again, we're going back to what is your end game? I mean, Pierre is exactly right. What are we trying to accomplish? Because putting somebody in their place is not going to accomplish that.
Right.
You know,
Right.
if we're trying to get information from somebody, if we make them angry at us or resistant to us, we're never going to get anywhere with them. So
Mm-hmm.
if we learn to be responsive rather than reactive, and, we learned a long time ago that not to put ourselves first. And there are times certainly when yourself is important, but in most of these situations, it's not really about what makes me feel better. It's it's about that other person, and how can I get them to understand that this is going to benefit them in the end as well?
Right. Yeah, it's so important not to burn bridges, so to speak, because that really can push away clients, push away business, make something more difficult than it needs to be. And then maybe keep in mind too that we don't have to take everything so personally, even though you might be the one on the front line having that conversation or interaction. At the end of the day, you're representing your employer, you're representing your firm, again, whatever your role may be. Almost, I kind of want to say, like, don't shoot the messenger, like in a sense, you're just the messenger. Try not to take it personally. And then 9 times out of 10, the person on the other side is also just the messenger. Try not to shoot the messenger.
And to piggyback on that, this industry is like a spider web. It's so interconnected. If you have one negative interaction with somebody over email, you don't know. People bounce around all the time in this industry. They could very well end up coming back around. You're interacting with them again 20 years from now. You don't want to have this lasting negative relationship because of one email miscommunication.
Right.
And the way that we talk about people, like if I said something negative about Janis to Sandi and Janis are still working together, and it's going to impact their relationship. And is that worth spreading to other people? Probably not, when we could sort it out between, me and Janis if we've got a problem.
Yes. Use some wisdom and what you say and who hears it, timing. So true, very valuable. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. All right, here's another tip, again, to try to come across with that more positive tone via email, or maybe when there is a difficult conversation to be had. If you've heard of something called the sandwich tool, and you think of 2 slices of bread with all the meat and good stuff in the middle, there's a way you can structure a response or an email, even if you're the one initiating the email, with this sandwich tool. So if you start by offering some kind of praise, something positive. Hey, I appreciate that you have been a great coworker or client for the last 5 years or whatever it may be. And then so start with something positive, an acknowledgement of who they are and the role they have and the things they have done well. And then address your concern or make your request. It's usually easier than to follow up with, hey, you've really been an excellent client for 5 years. However, we really need more timely response on bill payments or whatever. So you started with a positive, you're making your request, and then it's not coming across, hey, you haven't paid your bill in the last 5 months and you're always late and it's really costing us extra work and whatever that may be, right? You may be feeling all that. You want me to say all that to get the positive response. If the response you want is to get the payment on time or whatever the concern or request may be. And then always try to wrap up with some kind of statement of gratitude. Hey, I really appreciate your prompt attention to this matter. We really appreciate your consideration and how we can work together towards smoother closing. Right, whatever that issue or circumstance may be intentional to start with something positive, address your request or make your statement of concern, and then express your gratitude again. Hopeful, positive, be mindful of your tone as much as possible. Any thoughts here?
Well, if you lead with the problem, you come across immediately as accusatory, right? And then the person is immediately defensive. Whereas if you said, I appreciate how you've helped me in the past, and I going forward, I would love it if you would blah blah blah. You can say it in such a way that, I know this is not really like you, but
Yes.
and because anybody can have a bad day, anybody can overlook something,
Yep.
and and of course a lot of people don't necessarily agree with this, but I usually say, I may have missed it, but did you send me da 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 da? So it's possible you know, I'm leaving the door open and they
Yeah.
go, oh gosh, no, I didn't send it to you. And then nobody's mad. Or they might say, well, I sent it to you last Tuesday. And I go looking last Tuesday and whoops, there it is. Cause I actually did miss it,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So, again, we have to allow grace for, for folks who have made an error or an oversight. And like Pierre said, it's a spider web in so many ways. Responsibilities overlap and everybody has a lot to do. So
Yeah.
it's easy to overlook something or miss something. So how would you feel if I said I was sorry, and that's how that person's feeling on the other end too sometimes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of email skills is just connected to good people skills, right?
Right.
Like we
Right.
just want to extend grace and compassion because we know there's going to come a time when we need that same grace and compassion because it's
Right.
not, if we will one day make a mistake, it's when, right? We're all human.
Right.
And, so it's
Absolutely.
important to stay humble and kind, even in the midst of a challenging moment. Thanks, Sandi. So when in doubt, follow up and double check to clarify. Have you ever gotten that email and you just really still don't know what they're asking for, what they're talking about, and there's still a little bit of mystery to decipher? What they say when you assume, right? Be
Mhm.
careful with your assumptions. Don't hesitate to double check. It's worth a little extra follow up just to be sure. Also double check who is on the receiving end of email. Make sure you've got the right person, especially if it's someone with a common name and maybe your email software is just generated. For example, the first Karen or Lisa that pops up, but you've got 5 Lisas in your contact list. And you want to make sure it's going to the right one. And then certainly, again, this kind of goes along with being humble. Ask someone else's opinion if you're just not sure what to say, or again, if you need help crafting your email, or again, I would say go to Chat GPT and maybe they can help you with your tone or what to say or how to phrase something in a friendlier manner. But yeah, do what you can to get some help or support when you need them. Any other thoughts here?
My tip is if you are confused about what someone is trying to say, read it out loud. They may have written it in the way that makes sense in their head in a conversational tone, and reading it out loud might provide clarity of what the intention of their email is before you ask for a clarification, or it just might provide what you need. Just getting it out. Or some people do voice to text. So if a word doesn't make sense and you say it out loud and you hear, oh, it was actually supposed to be this near word or something like that, it might work for you.
That's true. I appreciate that. That's actually another tip I would give students before submitting an essay is to read it out loud. You'll hear the flow, you'll hear the tone, you'll hear if something didn't quite make sense. If you stumbled to read it out loud, it's highly likely that someone's going to stumble to read it and understand what you were trying to say. So that can work both ways. Trying to decipher someone else's tone by reading the email. It's a good way to check yourself and see how you sound or how you might come across with what you are sending. Of course, best practices, check spam and junk folders frequently. It might be worth setting a reminder on your computer, like once a week, once a month. Don't let those sit for too long. Again, I think we've all been there where we were expecting something and lo and behold, it landed somewhere else. So be mindful of that. Certainly double check things like spelling and grammar. I don't know what it is, but especially autocorrect, if you're ever sending, for example, like an email on your phone and you're typing and, quickly and hit send before you double check, and some autocorrect has made something silly or ridiculous or inappropriate. So be careful, check, and double check, especially when it's a high level person on the receiving end or a more of an important email. Slow down, take some time. Be careful not to exclude you. Another best practice, and I think most people do this, but create a friendly email signature and follow whatever your office protocols may be as far as what to include in that email signature. I'm going to share mine just as an example to talk through some items. It doesn't mean that yours needs to look like mine in any way. There's a lot of conversation around whether or not to include a photo in an email signature. I think a lot of people see it as it builds some personal touch in the online world, to try to have a friendly face to go with a name. And yet some people maybe prefer not to hide things like gender or race. If you have a gender neutral name, some people feel like, if someone appears to be a man versus a woman, they may be treated with more respect or authority. Who knows? Sad to say, but those kind of stereotypes or prejudices could still exist. But whatever your employer has decided, again, certainly your name, your title. We've also included phone, email, address, website. We've also hyperlinked to things in our email address to help people quickly find our calendar if they're interested in training, because that's what we do. And again, ours is a little more colorful because we have a presence on all the social media platforms. And again, we are a school versus a law firm or a title company. So ours may look different than what you would want yours to look like. But be mindful of color, be mindful of font, be mindful of branding and just the overall image that you want to portray in your email signature. And again, bottom line is to just be mindful about it. Anyone else want to share thoughts on this tip?
I think you covered that really well.
Okay, all right, moving on. And this is really the last tip for this presentation. Use an use an automatic responder when away from the office, especially if it's going to be an extended period of time where you know you're going to be a little slow to respond to an email. If possible, include another contact, their name, their title, their phone number, email address, whatever. Again, the best protocols are for your particular circumstance. I kind of have to laugh a little bit because we see a lot of email autoresponders that come back when we send out our newsletters. And so I really do get an interesting array of examples from people using humor, people sharing, personal family details like, oh, we're going to play grandma to the new grandbaby, things like that. I also have seen autoresponders that just say, hey, I'm at lunch and I'll be back in an hour. And I'm like, wow, I don't know that I would have set up an autoresponder for something that's going to be that short. But again, whatever works for you. Again, just be mindful. And again, be mindful of your image, be mindful of your branding, be mindful of your tone and your level of professionalism and how you come across. And our last reminder, we shared this one previously, but it's a good reminder. It says, dance like no one is watching, but text and email like it will be read in court one day. You never know when email will come back to haunt you. And so be aware, be careful, and I hope that we've been able to share some tips to give you something to think about. And we hope that you will be a professional keyboard warrior in your role in your career. Any final comments from, yeah, go ahead.
So when I'm writing my emails, I like to apply the CAR principle because email is our vehicle of communication. So this works for me personally. You can take it or leave it. So CAR is content, attachments, and recipient. And I write in that order. My content comes first, and then I add my attachments. And lastly, I assign my recipient because I don't want to accidentally send to someone before the email is finished or before I've checked over and added my attachments. So that would be helpful to think about it in that order. Drive the
Okay,
car.
say it again. CAR stands for what?
Content,
Content.
attachments, recipient.
Okay. I love that. I
Great
wish we
tip.
made a slide. Yeah, that's so wise.
Thank
Because
you.
again, you can't just accidentally hit send because most of the email software layout puts the recipient at the top. And so we start at the top and then finish with the content. And it actually should be reversed.
Mhm.
So I like that. Do we minimize hitting send and before you really intended to? That's a great final tip and reminder. Thanks for sharing that there. All right, that concludes our RECP radio for today, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.